Hello, all of you here in person and remote. And thank you for joining the tutorial. Of course, we had some slight technical problems as always, but I think we will be able to manage it somehow. I'm Matthias, and these are the other organizers that are in person, Sophie and Xiaoming. Sophie is from the Berlin Institute of Health, and Xiaoming is from Heidelberg University. And we have two remote presenters. One is Celia. She will just follow up the introduction. And the other one is Alexander, but I think we will have a short introduction just now that we can somehow also get a bit of an impression what you are trying to do. So our tutorial today has the title Aligning FAIR Data Principles in HL7 FHIR Profiling. So I think most of you at least know one of the two topics very well, else you wouldn't have joined today. But hopefully you are expert in FHIR and FAIR so that we can somehow profit from your knowledge. We suppose that we have two sessions with a small break. In the first one, we want to introduce you to the topic in short, but also to the three implementation guides that we currently have that somehow cover FAIR aspects with regard to healthcare data. Then we will have a tool demo because we provided in preparation for the tutorial an expert in FHIR for our research data management system. And then I think we should also spend some time on practical exercise because it's a tutorial. I think maybe some of you had an idea what study or trial or cohort also here likes to be verified or that we can talk about a use case. But on the other way, we also have some examples or at least some links where you can gather artifacts that we want to verify. And finally, in the third part, I think we will have a discussion what that could mean to utilize the HL7 FHIR standard to achieve maximum fairness. So this is the plan for today. So now I think we make a short introduction. So I'm Matthias Löbe. I'm from Leipzig University. And yeah, I'm a bit part of all the organizing stakeholders. So somehow I'm working for the National Infrastructure for Health Data in Germany, but also for the Medical Informatics Initiative that is situated there. And I was also part of the initial effort of HL7 Europe to build this FHIR4FAIR implementation guide. But yeah, I was not very active, so most of the work has been done by Giorgio, who's unfortunately not able to be here today, but he is some kind of the HL7 associate that created the standard for trial use that is currently available.
Yeah, okay. I'm Marco Nolden. I'm also from Heidelberg, but also not from the university. I'm from the German Cancer Research Center. And I'm also participant in the sorry, many acronyms. The MEE in a method platform called OMI, Open Medical Inference, which is imaging related. And I'm also have a imaging informatics, medical informatics background. But recently I'm also coordinating the so-called Helmholtz metadata collaboration hub health, which is a unit inside Helmholtz, which is catering to all Helmholtz health research centers, trying to support FAIR data principles in the Helmholtz health research space by better metadata, better visibility of the research data produced in Helmholtz or in cooperation with clinical partners.
And do you also have some experience with FHIR? Just to...
I'm part of the Raccoon project, and we are currently making first steps in, so I have but only participated a few times in the Kerndatensatz group, which is looking after imaging metadata and imaging reports. But I must say I'm a bit newbie, to be honest. I've not done any active modeling, but I was afraid. Okay. I just want to get an impression.
Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Alban Gagnard. I come from France. So I'm working also in a national infrastructure for bioinformatics. In this infrastructure, we have been developing a tool for the assessment of FAIR data. It's called FAIR Checker. I'm computer scientist, and also I'm involved in a biology lab. And in this lab, we are coordinating a national project on intracranial aneurysm. And we built a knowledge graph to combine imaging markers, to combine genomic markers, and also clinical observations. So I'm not knowledgeable in FHIR, more in ontologies for life sciences, but I would be very interested to see what we can do with FAIR clinical data.
Thank you.
So my name is Sabine Österle. I'm working for the Swiss Personalized Health Network and dare to say the Data Coordination Center, which is led by the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics. And within that, actually, I'm the strategy lead for the semantic interoperability strategy and FAIR data. So more or less coordinating all the activities within SPGen around semantics and FAIR data. I think quite a lot of experience in FAIR, not a lot of experience in FHIR, and actually that's why I'm here to learn about that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alex Stickelman. I am an intern at the Biosemantics group at the LUMC, and I'm also trying to moderate this meeting. And yeah, I'll just be here for any questions, and I hope I can resolve them.
Hi everyone, I'm Femke Edema. I work for Pharmexis. It's a non-profit, and we are currently working on a big project looking at pregnancy data in Kenya and Tanzania. And as part of the project, we're building a health data commons where we're trying to actually integrate the FAIR and FHIR profile. So we'll see what I can learn how to bring this theory to practice.
Hi, I'm Eric Pudermo, a longtime semantic web geek, and been active in FHIR RDF and also working with Mark Overs' crew on FAIR. But I never thought for a moment about, and I've even taken some FHIR data and written FAIR descriptions of it, but I never thought even a moment about the interaction with profiles, so it'll be fun.
So you are doing the RDF serialization for FHIR next week. Okay.
So yeah, just if you're annoyed by the FHIR RDF representation, let me know. It also, if you have questions about it, it changed a lot from R4 to R5, so I can talk about how we changed it.
Okay.
So hi everybody, my name is Philip Patton. I'm a co-founder of FHIR, which is a contraction of FAIR and quality. It's a combination of a non-for-profit and a for-profit organization. We're trying to set up an ecosystem where we build solid vaults, data vaults, and where we would like to combine FHIR with solid. Yeah. And so I'm quite familiar with FAIR. I'm quite familiar with ontologies, but I'm not so familiar with FHIR. And so one of the reasons I'm here is to learn more, to meet Eric, to ask some questions. And I'm a former cancer researcher, also did a postdoc at DKFZ, at the German Cancer Research Center. So glad to be here.
Yeah, as I already told you, we will now have some introductions to the existing work that we have. So, but first we have to have an introduction for our, let's say, super FMI group from the European Medical Informatics Association or Federation of Medical Informatics, because there is a working group on FAIR data in health performing organizations, and Celia is leading the group with me as the second chair, and I hope I will be able to somehow give her, or at least Celia, can you yourself grab the video conference?
Yes. Could you hear me right?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So my name is Celia. Please apologize because I cannot join in person because I have another event in the same week. Thank you very much for joining this interesting tutorial. prepared principally by my colleagues that are there in person. Thank you very much for the other authors of this tutorial, because I know that this tutorial had hard work during the preparation. So let me introduce this working group on FAIR data as part of the European Federation for Medical Informatics. And we can go to the next slide, please.
Okay. So.
Yes, let me introduce that this new working group in FMI, in this Federation for Medical Informatics, is to expand, to extend the work done in the FHIR4FAIR project that was funded by the European Commission and finalized in November 2021. So in FHIR4FAIR, we encourage the scientific community to apply FAIR principles in the health research domain, addressing the challenge of sensitive data. So this new working group, since 2021, works on complying FAIR data in health research. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the main objectives of this working group. We aims to search methods and tools to apply FAIR principles, addressing the challenge of data science to promote the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. So in this tutorial, if we move to the next slide, in this tutorial, we would like to discuss the use of FHIR to comply or to follow up FAIR principles. So we combine in the FHIR4FAIR implementation guide, we combine the FHIR standard to address the interoperability principle, and also the FAIR principles, the FAIR recommendations. So my colleagues will show different interesting use cases to apply this implementation guide. This implementation guide was performed in the FHIR4FAIR project file, but we continued to work in this implementation guide. And also in this moment, we aims to extend this implementation guide and to update this if applied. So please, in the discussion slot, we can share different use cases, we can share experience. I think that we can continue with the presentation of this implementation guide. And also my last slide.
Oh, too fast.
Yes, my last slide is how you can join to this interesting working group. You can go to the FMI website and you can search the FAIR, the working group on FAIR data. And if you complete this form, you can follow up the progress of this working group, because we are participating in different events from 2021, and we organize different workshops, tutorial sessions to extend this work and to share our experience with other experts in specific and dedicated workshops. So we can go to the first slide of questions.
Yeah, just one moment. I will manage this with my account. So I think most of you are used to use Slido. It's just like Mentimeter, because we weren't sure how many people were attending offline also. We thought it would be better to have these.
Yes, we can see the first question in Slido. And this first question is to know more about us.
So then I
Go to the
switch to the next one. I think this was only a test.
Yes, and this is introductory questions, because then in the discussion we can hear different experience with projects on FHIR.
So for all these people working with FHIR, of course, you know that there is this versioning thing. No, I thought I wait a minute, because obviously it was only 4 answers or 8. And we have 2 more questions. Yeah, if you do it fast, then you get the next number. I think this question somehow focuses on publishing metadata or research artifacts, not just HL7 FHIR data, because I think this is the primary motivation to have healthcare data in FHIR. So obviously everybody would say yes. But for research artifacts, it's not so clear. And I think the FHIR standard is currently doing a lot of work in this domain, but it's much more mature in the care domain. Of course, we also want to get some impression what the community currently does. So now you have the opportunity to just enter the use cases, maybe from the introduction, so that we are able to, from our side, can look at your use cases. Okay, maybe we also have some discussion afterwards. Yeah, Giorgio is not today. Today he's not here, so I will do his presentation, and I think I can skip something about the FAIR data principles, because everybody knows of them. And of course, everybody knows that if you ask people, are you fair? Now everybody says yes, of course. I think now after 7 years, they learned a lot about, yes, I have to say yes to this. But of course, we are not always satisfied with this answer, because if they say yes, I think it's half of a misunderstanding, because it's not a yes-no question, of course. Yeah, and in the FAIR for Health project that Celia introduced, we had at the end this working deliverable of an implementation guide for research data assets. And it was done by HL7. And the idea was, let's say, in FHIR, you have such things like patients or observations and so on, but it's much harder to say what a data set is in FHIR. So we wrote an implementation guide that consists of multiple things. There is some human-readable part that just tries to explain how we think that FHIR could help to be fair, addressing every of the FAIR criteria or guiding principles. But of course, every implementation guide also has some kind of technical normative parts where you specify, let's say, what in FHIR is a structured definition, just a computable, machine-readable artifact. And yeah, we done this for some basic scenarios, but we do not have the time to implement it in practice on a large scale. So we hope the community would somehow take it up. But yeah, that's a hard thing, because everybody has a lot to do. And so we need to push the community a bit into adapting these principles and these guidelines. So yeah, on the website, we have a lot of links for the FHIR4FAIR implementation guidelines, so a guide, so that I do not want to go into detail here. And just as an example, for instance, how to represent a research study. There is a resource called research study, and of course we utilize this, but how to represent a record of a research study or a data set or some assets that were used to let's say, to analyze or to publish such things. And of course, this is not so clear currently. So we also want to express additional information like citations or like, let's say, usually if you got a data set or you download a data set from a repository, you need some explanation of the variables contained. What do they want to measure? What are the measurement units and so on? And of course, in FHIR, you would have it if it's an observation also, but it's not so easy for some, let's say, tabular data that you usually get if you download it somewhere. So, and this, yeah, to sum up, I think the FHIR4FAIR Health Implementation Guide was a nice introduction with a focus on FAIR data. So you might be able to read a lot of how we think FHIR could be a help to getting FAIR data. But for the implementation side, there is some kind of basic scenarios, just ideas how to do it. And now we will present 2 other implementation guides that are more, let's say, aimed at being used in practice because they have some certain scenario. And I think this is
I'll try to be short. So I will present the NFDI4Health initiative. NFDI4Health stands for National Research Data Infrastructure for Personal Health Data, and is a German initiative that is focusing on data generated in clinical trials, epidemiological and public health studies. And the mission is in general to provide new opportunities and versatile tools for the scientific use of personal health data while preserving the privacy requirements of these data. And we want to increase the value of the research and make the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And to mention only few services or aspects of NFDI4Health, we have a health study hub that is gathering all kind of resources, metadata of those resources being, for example, research studies, documents, questionnaires, but we also want to provide data dictionaries, data sets, registries, etc. We have the data publication track, which is covering the publication of the metadata, also the creation of DOIs. So that's why we are trying to introducing or implement also metadata from the data side metadata schema. We have different data harmonization protocols, which are currently in probation and different use cases, etc., etc. And this is an initiative with about 20 partners in all Germany. So next slide, please. So to fulfill this purpose, we created a very generic metadata schema in NFDI4Health. On the left side, you see like the generic part covering like core aspects of resources. So for example, who contributed to the resource, what are the bibliographic information, which identifiers are used, where the data come from, etc. For specific resources, we have also like a design aspect. So for example, which kind of studies do we cover? Is it an interventional, non-interventional study? Maybe what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria? Can I describe the population? What are the administrative information, etc., etc.? And then we have on the right side some specific or custom metadata which are provided for specific use cases we have in our initiative. So for example, for nutritional epidemiology, the researchers were interested to know which diet assessment instrument was used or in which frequency the questions were asked. In chronic diseases, they were interested to know about the specific conditions, but also the group of conditions. And then we have also like a very important use case, which is a record linkage, because in Germany, it's a kind of a pain currently to merge different data sets from different sources. So next slide, please. So just to present shortly our standardization efforts in NFTI for Health, our main work, our daily work is like to analyze and select like suitable standards for our use cases and also like for the metadata in general. So we analyze data and processes, and we also analyze the standards. We try to foster the implementation of international standards, so semantic standards like SNOMED-CT, NCI, ICD, etc. We have HL7 FHIR for the syntactic standards, and we try also to look other initiatives or registries like ICRIN or the WHO registry. We try to support the communication of the different platforms and systems that we use within NFTI for Health. And last but not least, we are also trying to educate and provide advice internally. So we try to help the researchers also select proper standards to use in their use case. We have regular meetings, and we build proper feedback loops with the users and use cases, but also with SDOs. Next slide, please. So what we did was to map the entire metadata schema, which was modeled in an Excel file. And it's quite massive. We have like more than 200 items. And as said, we try to map this entire metadata schema to FHIR and to semantic standards. We used R4 because most of the initiatives in Germany are still using R4, notably MII. And we built our logical models based on this Excel file. We have the core metadata schema and then like 2 logical models for the use cases, chronic diseases and nutritional epidemiology. We created in total 12 profiles with almost 50 extensions, which is quite a lot. And I think it's not really best practice, to be honest. We have 4 code systems and more than 70 value sets using, as said, semantic standards like SNOMED-CT, ICD, NCI. We also in the first iteration use UMLS, but we try to get rid of it. We created all of those resources using FHIR shorthand language, which is kind of a programmation language to write FHIR code, and have our project on GitHub and Simplifier, so it is publicly accessible. And the package which I'm talking about is currently version 1.0. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you see like the kind of ecosystem of profiles we created. I think one is missing because it just came some weeks ago. It was a location, but otherwise you see on the left side the main focus that we set, namely research studies, document reference, and questionnaire. Document reference is kind of very generally used currently. We also use it for data sets and data dictionaries, but I think in this tutorial we will or we might discuss if there are maybe better solutions for that. And on the right side, you see the collaborators and also related artifacts. So, for example, citations or notable artifacts that are in charge of that. And on the left side below, it's more or less the inclusion-exclusion criteria, interventions, and exposures. So maybe next slide. I don't know if you have any time for that, but you see here an example of how a research study profile looks like. I open the drop-down menus, so you see that there are like many extensions on the left side, namely also like to describe properly like which resource type or it is because this is like one of the main criteria and data set to get an DOI. We have also information about the population, inclusion, exclusion criteria, about the study status, and different possibilities to use identifiers. So you can apply different identifiers from different systems. Maybe next slide. Here are the profiles from document reference and questionnaires. It's only a differential view, so you only see what we changed from the base profile. And notably, which is maybe interesting for you, is that you can add different descriptions in different languages, but you have also the possibilities to set up use rights, license information, etc. Also important is to know that some of the extensions are used in different profiles. So for example, the resource type or the roles, we reuse it in the different profiles that we created. Maybe next slide. In NFTI for Health, we tried also to focus on the different roles or associated parties, the collaborators of the resources. So you can use human collaborators being practitioners and practitioner roles or organizations. And also here you can address like the address, the contact points, the identifiers of those collaborators. Next slide, please. Here I said like the organizational collaborators. As for the humans, also address can be set, identifiers and so on. And next slide. For research studies, it's also really important to set up like the inclusion and exclusion criteria. In R4, it's I think not so flexible than in R5. So you can only set some characteristic. Here we have, for example, the gender and the age, the minimum and maximum age, but you could also use other slices being here, set up your code and set up values. This is just an example about the intended group of subjects that we plan to enroll. Next slide, please. And so my last slide is about the provenance of data. So we choose to use the resource or the profile of provenance, but there are also other mechanisms in NFT or in FHIR in general, sorry, being the meta element, which is also often used to set up or to define from where the data is originating, who updated it, when was the last update, etc., etc. For us, it was especially important to set up the data source and who was in charge of it and which activity was performed. So, for example, the submission, the data collection, the update, etc., etc. And I think it was my last slide for NFTI for Health.
So there's a question. So Sophie, don't.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So I have one or two questions. So maybe three. This is just a profile of FHIR, or did you introduce new fields?
So what we did was creating a metadata schema. Then we created the logical models, and we showed or we looked after already existing FHIR elements. So when they were existing, we used them. As they were not existing, we had to set up extensions. The extensions are based on R4, and we also looked on the next version of FHIR being R5. And to be honest, research study quite evolved like between both versions. So if there were interesting changes in R5 that were really covering our use case, we recreated them from R5 and put them like in R4. So yeah, to respond, we created many extensions, and in FHIR there's this kind of Pareto rule, like being 80-20. Yeah, we are quite far away from that.
Okay, thank you. And for the provenance part, so I'm a big user of the PROV W3C ontology. So is it aligned? So I've seen that you are using activity entity agent. So is it aligned with the PROV ontology? Yeah. Okay, good.
At least a bit.
A bit, yeah.
Okay.
They just said we use the W3C PROV ontology, and then they made some changes, but you will recognize that it's based on PROV-O. But I think it's also another understanding, because I'm not sure, but I think these FHIR people think provenance is what we not have specified in detail, but maybe we will do it in the future. The real provenance is already in the FHIR data because you have generic attributes for everything. So yeah, it's also some kind of other focus, I think, compared to W3O that just tries to model the whole workflow and data provenance.
And do you have any instantiation of this model somewhere? Any public documents that people
yes,
could?
We have like about 40 examples,
Good.
which are also like in the Simplifier project. So we provide the QR code and it's publicly available, so you can just browse through. Maybe which is also important to say is that all the profiles are also like, or like in general, FHIR profiles, FHIR instantiations are also searchable. There are also like capability statements, search queries, and so on. So yeah, it's all online, and we can also provide the link in the chat.
Very nice, thank you.
Any other questions?
So is it correct that you try to use it as a kind of a catalog, metadata catalog, the system? Have you considered using DCAT?
Yeah, so we looked after different standards, and not only like medical standards, but also general like librarian also standards, as a data set, DCAT, Dublin Core, I don't think so.
DDI?
Yeah, DDI also. Yeah,
you got covered SP.
Okay. Yeah, I'm more like on the medical side, but yeah. So we considered also to use these elements, and we tried also to use all mandatory elements, like to be able to create also or manage UI from React. The metadata schema is used in the central search hub, so the platform which is cataloging all metadata resources. But it's also meant to be an exchange format between the central search hub and the local data hubs. So this is, I think, I don't know if it's already.
I would just give a short additional comment, because we were both doing this metadata thing. You have a lot to do with clinicians, biometricians, and so on. And then you say, okay, we have these DDI or DCAT, and they say, this is nice. We take this attribute and this, but this we will change a bit. And so finally, it's some kind of a la carte. So it's impressed by different standards, but I'm not sure if we are really formally aligned. So, but this is what I would like to do. Because, yeah, if we are honest, or if my life would depend on it, I would say it's all NFDI attributes. So it's it depends of if everybody thinks about the concept in the same sense. But we have not really made an evaluation. So I think some of these fields are also a bit dependent on who's using it. But this is a problem that every vocabulary has to some extent if it's used by multiple organizations.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is I'm involved or partially involved in the EHDS initiative. So you're probably all aware of that.
Yeah.
The legislation will normally be voted next year. We see how it will evolve, but in the coming years, we will need to implement as different countries. So that was the reason. If you're already considering, let's say, if you would like to be able to be findable and be able to exchange information on a higher level, on a national or European level, are you already considering this or thinking about it?
I think a DCAT mapping is a primary objective for 2 years now, because we know that EHDS is somehow building on it. It was a bit surprising for me. I know that, I mean, in a broader sense, they have this application profile for a while, but in the health domain, there was not much DCAT adoption in the past.
True, but there is also an initiative which is trying to make an application profile in AP. So you have DCAT AP in Europe, DCAT AP for health will also be, let's say, is in the making. So there is a draft version, which is quite, to be politically correct, shallow, shallow. But no, it's a start, also a consensus model. But I think the idea is there that Europe is in broad, in all domains using DCAT-AP, and they would like to see, okay, could we also use this for health, but then see how we can further extend this, and maybe based on the insights you are generating.
Actually, you touched on something that I've been trying to sort of quantify how we attack, which is the cost of an a la carte model, which is for instance, if I look at DDI, I have a giant schema and I know how everything is connected, and I have like UML pictures. And if I look at FHIR, I've got something similar to that. But what we don't have in either of those cases, or for instance, for DCAP, say FDPs or some fair data points or something, what we don't have are sort of use cases that motivate a minimal conformance with the schema. So that means that without use cases, without realizing the cost of picking things a la carte, without saying, oh, we're breaking this application, this application, this application. So to some degree, these applications are a few years out. They're kind of similar to, say, what was Carol Goebel's project with the experiment, my experiment, or something like that. Perfect, thank you. And so these are the sorts of applications that I think we need to envision when we're figuring out the cost of opportunistic reuse as the other way of saying a la carte. That's it. End of rant.
Behind you, there's
Yes, there's also a question in the SWOT for HLS chats. Do you have any general FHIR profiling guidelines for addressing FAIR principles? I understand that one is the profiling the provenance resource.
So
I get it, Mike. Yeah, I just want to make a stand.
So yeah, this is something I didn't address. So which would be important to do is to try to do, for example, some FAIR implementation profiles, and maybe also one other idea would be to map any of the FAIR principles like to the elements in the profiles. So in FSH or in general in FHIR, there's a FHIR mapping language, and you could set like this element refers to this principle, and I think this would then really show like which FAIR principles we address and which we don't address or don't cover currently. I hope it answers the question.
Okay, I think we switch to the next presenter, which is Alexander.
Yes, good morning all. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sophie, for the introduction of NFBI4Health. I'm happy to present now a partner initiative in Germany, which is the Medical Informatics Initiative. Starting from 2018, the MII has been founded in Germany to create so-called data integration centers. And what we want to achieve here in the MII is to make a core data set available throughout all university hospitals, which can be gathered by researchers for distributed research projects across all university clinics. The goal is to create not only the local data repositories, but also a good way for researchers to distribute these queries and build a so-called data access portal. And also to create registers for the research project itself. Yeah, and as part of that, also clinical research plays an important role. So maybe next slide, please. We were given the task to build that core data set, and one representation of that core data set is in FHIR. And because it's a huge task, multiple smaller teams were built to create separate parts of that core data set. So here you have an overview of what we call the so-called base modules, which is really the core of every research project, most likely. So we model medications, conditions, procedures, and administrative information about a person. And next to it, we have these so-called extension modules, which maybe goes into more specialized domains here. So we have, for example, microbiology, biosignals, oncology data, related data, but also for our purpose today here, we focus on how to represent the metadata of research studies to create project registers and make metadata about research studies available. Next slide, please. So in the research start, oh, maybe one slide back, yeah, quickly talking about that here. Also in our project, we have been using FHIR4 because most of the other national projects in Germany are currently using FHIR4. And it doesn't make sense to jump to the next FHIR version if you can't accept data and link to data to your outside partners. So again, we have been looking at FHIR5 to backport some very important changes to the model, but continue using FHIR4. And our initial focus was to represent the study level metadata and especially make inclusion and exclusion criteria computable. And that is an important part because before we started, we haven't seen too many other projects doing that. So that was a bit of a gap that we saw and wanted to address. So I think last month we released our first version. And it was balloted also by HL7 Germany. We received quite a lot of comments, so over 150 comments, which suggests that there is actually a lot of interest in that area. And yeah, hopefully soon we will see first implementations of that module. Yeah, next slide, please. So now maybe diving a little bit into technical details here, I wanted to highlight on how we represent a research study. And research study is really the core object that we want to model in the MII module. So similar to NFDI for health, we have quite a lot of metadata, and also for most parts we needed to rely on extensions because the core model didn't go into too much detail here. So we have information about the recruitment of study participants, and an important topic was also for everybody contributing to the project that you needed to have different names for a study. Sometimes it's called an acronym, then you have sometimes an official title, an unofficial title. So people like to call research studies different but similar names. So that we needed to model. And also, of course, you want to give credit to every person involved in a study. So the way that FHIR4 handles principal investigators, for example, is quite limited. So we needed to come up with a better way of addressing that, which we call here an associated party. And then, of course, you can have different identifiers. And interestingly, and that is also a challenge that we have been seeing so far, is that in the core FHIR model, every element except the status of a research study is optional. So there is a inherent need to specify on a local project level what is mandatory for your concrete implementation, because otherwise you will see quite a lot of diversity in the data. Yeah, so we still have to identify where is the, let's say, the part where you are too strict in handling cardinalities and making things required compared to what people have actually in their native systems and can represent in FHIR. So if you have any prior experience with that, I would be also interested in hearing that later. And then moving on to the next slide, please. I wanted to also quickly cover the inclusion and exclusion criteria modulation here. And in FHIR, there is currently not one way of modeling inclusion and exclusion criteria. If you ask multiple people involved in the matter, sometimes you will hear that these criteria should be modeled using a group resource. And starting in FHIR5, there was a initiative to start modeling these criteria using the so-called evidence variable resource. And evidence variable is quite broad, but it can also be scoped down to model these criteria. So what we did here is to rely on that resource type here, because it gives us the most flexibility in handling inclusion criteria. So far, we wouldn't be aware of any other initiative that has computable inclusion and exclusion criteria in FHIR. So I think we are one of the first projects using that resource here. And it's a quite broad model, I would say, because it allows you for a lot of different combinations. So you can define and or combinations for the inclusion criteria to build even more complex criteria. You can have coded definitions for a criterion, which you would need to know on how to handle that on your local project. Or you can even include executable definitions of a criterion if you want to have a very specific criterion that you want to evaluate that can only be evaluated as part of some code. So, for example, you could use the HL7 clinical quality language here, CQL. Yeah, but of course, we recognize that for most projects today, the inclusion and exclusion criteria are defined in free text. So that's why we also give you the option in the implementation guide to include them directly without any computable transformation in order to make that metadata accessible. And I think that's it so far.
Yeah, thank you.
There was a follow-up question regarding the question about let me see about the FHIR profiling guidelines for addressing the FAIR principles. Is it okay if I ask that question first? Yeah.
Of course. Yep.
The target is to develop a FHIR IG that each university hospital in Germany should conform to in respect to their data sets. As a clarification question.
So in FTI for Health, we are quite focusing on the research domain and data holding organizations. We're not so much focusing on the clinical settings or hospital settings, but for sure, like when you address clinical trials or like studies in general, you also kind of address sometimes a care setting because you might include or exclude patients based on criteria in your EHR, etc. So I think, as said, like the focus is more on research, but it touch also like the other settings and we try to have like a model or like profiles as generic as possible and as flexible as possible that can be used in different settings then.
So, yeah.
All right. So I think I'm very excited about computable inclusion and exclusion criteria, even if they are by necessity optional. There was a project by the U.S. Department, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, to model clinical practice. What was it called? Rewind about 10 years, I think. It was basically, if you're doing a study on kidney transplants, here is the general workflow for every clinical trial on kidney transplants, whether you're changing the drugs, you're changing the procedures, you're changing the selection criteria, etc. So what that did was it captured a lot of the inclusion and exclusion criteria for particular clinical profiles. And so what use cases that we used to motivate that were basically something like you do a clinical trial on something, and then your mental model for how something works changes, and then you get to go back and sort of find which of the clinical trials that thousands of clinical trials that have been already executed still have information that's relevant to your new mental model for how things work. One that I used was how once we figured out that there were bacteria that were causing ulcers, right? Totally changed our mental model, but you can still reuse some of the old clinical trials. So I can imagine that being a use case for your modeling of inclusion and exclusion criteria for your clinical trials here. Do you have other models of sort of what are the use cases that are motivating you apart from the general thought that machine good, if we can make the machine read it, we have to do less paperwork?
No, I think you already described the perfect use case here. So for us, it's a combination of the metadata for these inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then having the definition of them also machine readable. So what we would like to achieve is that eventually every project in Germany registers their criteria with a national portal, and that you can directly see which similar work is going on, and that you can combine and reach out to new partner initiatives saying, hey, we apparently have a similar use case that we're working on and share the same criteria that we're trying to evaluate, and let's see and maybe compare and reuse the data here.
That's fascinating. I think another aspect that comes out of this is you get much better access to negative clinical trials, right? If you pre-register and people have done 50 clinical trials and proving that something fails, or well, let's say 13, and then you do one and you prove with a p-value of 0.05 that it works, that it's positive, then you've already got something that statistically you are likely to get one by the 14th one anyway. So this is, I think, a way to avoid involuntary p-hacking as well. It's kind of a cool artifact of that.
We often, so in our project on intracranial aneurysm, we only have cases because it's people who just reach the hospital in an emergency case, and it's often difficult to get controls to compare imaging data or genomic data, and that would be very useful to have this machine actionable inclusion-exclusion criteria to find controls and to reuse genomic data, already processed genomic data, for instance.
What is your strength? Your statistical strength between
definitely, I agree with that. I think in one of the previous slides you saw that the research study module was just one of I don't know, I think 15 or so different modules. So we are trying to really integrate that in all the different other data modules that we have.
Have you experimented with taking basically writing down 3 different experiments with different inclusion-exclusion criteria with some intersection, and then calculating the intersection, perhaps with using some taxonomies that have some assumption like SNOMED, so that you can say, oh, we've already got one of those, or something that's pretty close to it. We just called it a slightly different thing. Have you
yeah, to be honest, that is still something that is pretty tricky, because we try to model some projects using a national register here in Germany, but so far what we found is that still most inclusion criteria are just free text, and we didn't expect that at first, but that's why we needed to come up with some new elements in the evidence variable to make that work, that we can represent at least the current state of the inclusion criteria. But it's really hard to compare the different ones currently. So I think we still have to motivate people to move also to a executable definition, and then I think then we can make these things work.
One approach that's people have toyed with in the past, there's a thing called structured digital abstracts, which was seems unrelated, but I'll tie it in, I promise. Where a lot of experimental reports have, like in papers that get presented, they have an abstract that's almost formulaic. And so the curators have to go through by hand, experts have to go through by hand and say, oh, well, this is saying that this gene upregulates this production of this protein in this context. And you could, and one of the approaches that people considered was having something where you actually write the thing in a structured way, and then it generates the human readable abstract. So in your case, it would be people enter the inclusion-exclusion criteria in a structured way, and it generates the text. So this would be not for, you still need an army of curators to deal with all the stuff that's already been published, but a tool like that might be a way to get people to voluntarily or accidentally give you structured data.
Yep. I think the first step in that direction would be that we make the current state also available in FHIR, so that we can more easily process the metadata and then see how far off are we to some comparable and executable definitions.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, what we see also is that, like, the main registries for clinical studies, like clinicaltrials.gov or DRKS in Germany, are really just focusing on age that is then included in a structured way, but all other kinds of characteristics are really free text, and somehow researchers are not really motivated to put them like in a structured way. One common example is to see that you can include conditions of interest, and then you see inclusion criteria, conditions see above, and then you're like, okay, but the condition studied is maybe not inclusion criteria, not exclusion criteria. So maybe if those or these registries would provide some templates or like some, I don't know, drop-down menus saying maybe gender, age, like common characteristics, maybe really common characteristics to be put like in a structured way, it would be maybe like a good first step. I mean, we will not cover like all kind of exclusions or eligibility criteria, but it might be a good first step.
I mean, of course, there are the CROs in Germany, like Parexel or so, that are international for the commercial trials. But in academia, we have our own network of called clinical trial centers. So every university has such a CRO thing. But they are not so much into standards. Huh? So a standard, if you have more than one text area, then it's a structured data form. So it's always hard to persuade them that it makes sense, at least at one point in time, to invest, because we had a lot of projects, let's say, having the 100 most valued inclusion criteria or so modeled, but then they said, I'm not sure if it's the right one. I write it in retext just to be sure, because if it's a computable inclusion-exclusion criteria, they are a bit reluctant what that means. Huh? So, yeah, it's maybe I do something wrong, but if I only write cardiological things, then nobody can point me at this. And so it's very hard. But I think, because, I mean, we have two initiatives, the NFDI for Health, covering all the research data, and the MII that has the healthcare data. So I think it would be interesting to get these healthcare data for research, which is the intention. But currently, yeah, it's just in a stage of these data to be transferred to FHIR. On the just as a side comment, when we started the Medical Informatics Initiative, there were 4 consortia, and none of them was built on FHIR. So one was using OpenAir archetypes, one was using clinical document architecture and IHE, one was using OMOP, and one I2B2. And because we thought this would not be a way to progress, having these 4 different, but they were the fastest. They were the fastest one. They were very well connected with Zachar Hain and Sean Murphy, and so they just, there was a lot of previous work, so they were able to do the most thing in a short time. But then we said we need a common exchange format, and so we all used FHIR, which was not the native one for anybody. So it's hard. Huh? It took a lot of years, but now they are also doing a lot of research projects beyond the clinical trial, just some local research in university hospitals. And they will also need to have these inclusion-exclusion criteria and all these registration. So if you want to use these medical informatics data nationwide, you have to sign what is called a contract. And then I can use data from whole Germany. But this requires my research to be registered. And this is like a trial registry on a smaller scale. But of course, this is a possibility where Alex hopefully will also enforce some more semantics, because, as I already said, they had about 10 fields and they are all text areas. So we always, let's say, we never got these emails. So every time that Alex got his emails, he presses delete, and then we said, no, we have not received this email. But I think if we work together, maybe it's possible to enhance in this view.
The question is, to what extent is the National Research Data Access Portal and Register implemented?
Who asked this?
An anonymous person.
No, it's fully implemented.
Can you say it, or is it an NDA?
Yeah, no. I mean, what is the central access portal? It consists of a lot of modules. you have some kind of, let's say, dashboard where you can see what's in there. So it's a public view, it's implemented, and I think it's updated every 2 weeks or so. And then you see I have 100 million medications and 200 million laboratory values and so on. Then we have these kind of registry for the projects, and also some kind of, let's say, contracting portal where you can ask for data, because of course that needs some ethics committee and so on. And we also have a feasibility portal that just allows you ad hoc to query how much data you would get today for a given setting. And then we have some kind of data quality queries that just do internal things like, are these data valid? Which FHIR profile is currently served by all these sites and so on? And this is not public, it's an internal measurement. So there are a lot of things that are part of the national data portal.
That was the question.
So back to the first question, do we want to make a break? So till 11, I think. I think we can in the second part also somehow adjust what we want to do, because it's not so, let's say,
Structured.
pre-focused. And I think we provided some kind of tutorial where you can work with FHIR even if you have not before.
Okay.
We can show it. We have a demonstration of this Seek tool, just because you said that Xiaoming implemented it in parallel in Seek, so that you can just, let's say, have a graphical user interface and enter some data, and then you see what's automatically exported. But I think we can also discuss some kind of the FAIR implications about all this. How, for instance, which assets should be somehow regarded as important as research artifacts. I mean, we have this data sharing perspective, which is currently not addressed, at least in the MII. The data integration centers, they provide all the data they have, but they are not interested in how it's being used also. It's just, but if I do want to make research, I have additional, let's say, I want to know what have they done, in which time interval, and so on, from which IT systems does this data come from, and so on.
Right. I was just wondering if maybe during the break, show off a couple of FHIR resources and say, this is what the structure definition language gives you. This is what a logical model is. This is what fish is, that kind of thing.
So, I mean, you don't know Seek, but you know the big guy behind it, the Professor Carol Gobler. Yeah. So Seek was initiated in 2008, led by the University of Manchester, the group of Professor Carol Gobler and HIT, so our institute. And later on, there are other partners came on board, like the Elixir Node in Belgium, in Norway, and last year the Sign Life Lab in Sweden also joined us. So the FADM-Seek project platform is open source research data management. So so the Seek platform is a research data management platform. It's developed and supported by the FADM consortium. And it is a web-based tool for organizing and sharing and publishing scientific research data component, such as dataset, protocols, samples, workflows, publications, and other research outcomes. This platform not only preserve those entities, but also remain association between them, along with information about people and organization involved. So by aligning with the FAIR principle, so Seek platform allowed the researchers to manage their data in a findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable way. Next slide, please. So since 2008, the FADM-Seek has been extensively adopted across various scientific initiative. So it's initially designed for application in system biology project. Its utility has been progressively extended to be used in a broader scientific domains. For example, so like a workflow hub, it's a registry for computational workflows. Or this license project, this is system medicine project for study liver disease, which is also use Seek as their data management platform. And currently there are over, I think, 150 or more instances of Seek installed globally. And among those, the FHIR hub on the left side is one of the biggest installation. It's a central registry for storing, sharing, publishing research asset in biology project. And it has around 2,000 registered users and about 400 projects. So the bigger project disease, COVID-19 disease map use FHIR hub to collect their knowledge and the research outcomes, and also maintain the user community there. Next slide. So as you say, like Matthias and Sophie, we are all involved in the FHIR4Health project. The local data hub in the project is also based on Seek. The local data hub is the main local component and the connector of this federated distribute service in FHIR4Health. It allowed the data holding organization to manage the personal health data locally. It provides a standardized platform for collaborative sharing of projects, publication studies, and other software tools. And it also provide precise control over data access with a fine-grained access rights management. The local data hub also support REST API. This allowed the interoperability and the data exchange with other tools like DataShield, Personal Health Train. And the local data hub also allowed the data holding organization to publish the studies to this German health study hub, which is also a core service of FHIR4Health. Okay, next slide. So now you have a very short overview of Seek and its history and its purpose. Now we can dive into this a real instance of Seek, and we can gain some practical understanding of this platform. So for that, I need to share my screen. Mm-hmm. So first, we will use the sandbox for this demo, which I set up last week. And if you have the computer, you can also visit this URL, sandbox1.fedmhub.org. And you have options to register yourself. For your convenience, I also create 5 demo accounts. You can use this username and password to log in and try it out.
I don't think it's a great problem if they have the same account. It's just if you want to see different stakeholders doing things.
So now you see the Seek platform. So Seek is developed on Ruby on Rails, and we also provide a Dockerized installation. So it's very easy to set up your local instance. And the Seek is open source. You could find the source code in the GitHub. So later we'll show you some links for that. And you could easily customize your instance For instance, I change the logo, titles, I add some description for today's tutorial. And you can see some featured public content which has been recently created in this sandbox. There are some integration to other systems. And you have also these buttons strategically placed to help you to getting started easily. Without logging, you can already browse the content in Seek. This is the list of the resource type you can see in Seek. But since this is a sandbox, there's not so much to see here. So we've switched to the FHIR hub. That's the one I mentioned. It's maybe one of the biggest installation of Seek. And here you could see, for example, we can see the projects in Seek. There are currently 379 projects. You could search one type of project, like if we search for COVID, you can see all the COVID-19 related project here. If we click on one of the project, so you see here the landing page of the project, and you see here all the related items of this project, what the people, what the institution are involved in this project, and what resources are created or associated with this project. So if we see, we click on studies, you can see now there are 1,060 studies in FHIR hub. Only 411 studies are visible to you. That means they are public. That means the user have the control of their resource when to publish. You can also filter the study according to different criteria, like a project and the created time and so on. So if we click on one study, so you see the detailed page of this study. There's a title, descriptions. There are creator of this study. And you also see this structured information about all the data set or samples are generated from this study. There are something is public, you can see and browse, and there are some hidden one. You can see this in a tree view, and you also can see this in the graphic view. Can you enlarge one?
I think there's not recognizable online.
Okay, so you can make it quicker, bigger, and you can have all nodes shown. So it will be a good screenshot shot for your publication. Okay. Then let's go back to the sandbox. We want to create something. Before that, you need to log in. So I will log in with my account. Okay. Now I see already someone create a project. Yeah. So it doesn't work because I need to, as the admin, I need to approve. Yes, that's what we want to do. Yeah, now it's approved. So so after login, you can see something different on the landing page. So the project I'm involved and my recent activities in Seek. and you have this extra button to create a resource in Seek. So now we want to create a study. So here you can see for each resource you have actual text for to explain the resource you are going to create, and there are attributes which is marked with this asterisk. It's a mandatory input field you should give the value. And of course, it's recommended to provide additional information like a detailed description. It's not only help other user to understand your study better, and it's also enhances the searchability of the study. So I will just copy the text from the other study. And you can provide the rich text for your description, like mark it as a bold or at the links or images. And you need to assign investigation to your study, because Seek use this so-called ISA structure to organize the data. So each study belongs to one investigation. And now we need to add some additional metadata. So recognizing that a diverse requirement of different projects, Seek developed this so-called extend metadata feature to add additional user-defined or project-specific metadata for Seek resource. You can see here that are two available extended metadata type for study. And for today, we are going to select this MIMCT metadata. So after selecting this metadata type, additional metadata attribute field appearing on the page. With this feature, we can add more additional FHIR relevant metadata for the study, which is not covered by Seek. And this way we could develop, deliver a more comprehensive and enriched FHIR compliant data structure. So we just need to assign this attribute with a value.
Yeah, there are multiple names and there are different semantics of these titles, and there are multiple languages and so on. Yeah, this is for this year I have to go to Sophie. She can support at least 20 kinds of titles, but to be able to present a minimal version.
But
yeah, there's a scientific title and the short and the long, and there's a really an ontology on clinical trial titles.
So for that, actually, this extend metadata feature can support different type of attribute. For example, it can be a string, the date, and it can be a controlled vocabulary, and you can also add a link one attribute to other attribute, and add like a array of the. So, for example, the ICD code. You can add a new one. Just so possible, add a new one, and then you have the integer type. Just give some value to the attribute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Question. Someone online the presentation blurring or the speaking. What is the password and
there is on the website, there is a reference password if he looks to the tutorial or she looks to the tutorial website, and then for the LDH demo or Seek, In which chat I'm supposed to
You can see it's here.
Slack or?
So now I have entered all the data for this extended metadata. And I can also add other creators for this study. If the person has a profile in Seek, you can directly find them by entering the name. You can also add some the people who has no profile in Seek, so give the given name and family name. Then you can specify that who can view or edit this study. So Seek provides this free control over your data. For example, if you don't want to publish this data, you select no access. And if you want to publish, you select view. And you can share this study within this project with maybe a higher access level. The people in the project can edit this study, or you can share this study with a particular person. For example, Matthias, then I grant him with the manager right. So with this specification, you have grant this resource for different people with different level of accessibility. And then you can also add the text, maybe add a publication which associated with this study. So if everything has been entered, then I click create. It's telling you this resource will be public viewable. Now, we successfully created this study. You could see here all the data we entered just now, including this extended metadata, and also the association with this resource. In addition to viewing this resource information via the user interface, Seek also offers this another machine readable interface via the API. So simply just by adding .json at the end of the URL, you can see the resource structure in a JSON format. So this API access provide a way to programmatically interact with Seek, and it make it possible to interact, so to integrate with other systems. So.
But there is an RDF serialization. You have to use RDF instead of JSON as an extension, and then you get at least partly an RDF.
We have, yeah. We also has export for XML.
I think the point is that if you have these APIs, of course, you have to look into each API for each system and program it. And if you have a sophisticated RDF or so, you would not need to go too much into how to access it, because it's some kind of common ground.
So now we come to the FHIR. So we provide an internal mapping mechanism to export this Seek study to a FHIR resource type, which is a research study. So we have this button here and export to FHIR.
So this is the thing that Seek, that Xiaoming did in preparation of this tutorial, that this tool, the Seek tool, is able to export FHIR as well as JSON and RDF, just to have one single software tool that is available to just automatically build it, and not only on some kind of editor.
So now you can see this, it's a research study type of FHIR, and this is a FHIR compliant structure, and some metadata from this output is from the Seek, like title, like description, and some are coming from this extended metadata, like this study status and study types and so on. So for this FHIR export feature, it's really in its early stages. Primarily only now support for the FHIR version 4 with some certain limitations, and but the FedMan consortium has been continually working on the SIG development and support. So we have many ideas, and in the future we plan to add more features or improvement for supporting FHIR within SIG. So now I hand over to Matthias, that maybe you can say something how to make use of this output from the SIG to some validation.
In the break, we just thought that maybe Sophie is now giving some introduction to, let's say, the FHIR spec and the IGs based on the website, so you can do it in parallel. So maybe, yeah, you steal the. This is for people who want to do it by hand. So, but if you can also do it via an HTTP GET command. So if you click on export, please, Germain, then you see the URL. And
yeah, maybe I was just on some random project from the
yeah, no, it's prepared. Only the sandbox can do this currently.
Also the JSON.
No, the JSON export should.
JSON export should be available in FedM. No.
No, you just go to any study and enter .json. I mean, there are always numbers like 88, and then you make .json, and then you get it. I think it's for local deployments that are not too large, so it's not a direct competitor to Zenodo, I think. But for instance, why we are using it and parameterizing it for the data integration centers, there are usually, let's say, 10 people, and they have to track all these project proposals and also, let's say, which documents are part of it and what has been shared and so on. This could be useful, and if they have a FHIR export, then they could just, export all their projects and studies to the central registry. Currently, they do it manually, but this is always the problem of keeping it up to date. So this would be one usage scenario that I have.
So the data holding organization can have their own instance, and they keep their data in-house and then control what data they want to share with us. Okay, then
so this is now something I didn't prepare before, so bear with me. It's really an improv. So this is like the landing page of FHIR, HL7 FHIR, and you will always land to the latest version being released. So in this case, it's release 5. You have this yellow bar where you can see like the different versions of FHIR, or also the directory of published versions, and you can also see that already there's work in progress on the next version being R6, but the current version is R5. I will go to R4 because this is what we use mostly in NFDI4Health and MII, and also in the export that Xiaoming just presented. But in FHIR4FAIR, we also used R4B, and for the extensions, we used also some elements of R5. So do you?
Maybe one sentence about how this, I mean, it looks like semantic versioning or something, but is there something, statements about the compatibility? Because I mean, you just mentioned like 3 different.
Yeah, so.
Not latest versions, what's the rationale, or what's the recommendation for new activities? Guideline, expectations regarding compatibility? Or
there are like some conversion. Yeah, there are like some conversion tables between the versions. So for example, if some elements, some data types were not existing in one version, but in the other and so on, there are like some guidance what to use and how to use it. To be honest, like I didn't use it so much, I mainly focus on one version, so I didn't have this problem yet. But maybe you want to comment
I
on
mean,
that?
I think the FHIR people did a good job. It's in all initiatives that I have seen the best documented specification.
Let's see if I find
But
the
of
conversion.
course, they have to, let's say, find a point between people who want a stable information model because they invested 1 billion in their EHR system, and people who said, oh, we need this and this and this changed. And so they decided on these releases. But there is, of course, a backdrop. If you start your own project, I would say take the current release, it's stable. Or if you need to, take the current snapshot, it's the most feature-rich. But for instance, in the Medical Informatics Initiative, we have to stick to one version altogether. We cannot mix it up because, of course, it would break if you want to assemble it. So we started with 3, changed to 4, but now we can change to 5 if we're not doing it all together. And of course, if you look at our 20 modules, that's quite hard. And then all implementers have to switch too. And this is very hard. So I don't think they will to switch 5 in the near future or anyway.
Not in Germany.
But they will switch to version 6,
yeah.
They said. But of course, it's a promise that they not necessarily have to keep. Can I ask a question first? Do you are in contact with the Swiss initiative? Because they doing something similar to the MII, but with semantic web technologies. Yeah, the SPHN.
No,
so, no.
They're competition. I hate them. No, I don't know. I have no idea about it. I want to find out about it.
What? Oh, hello. Okay. The online question is there a plan to also import the FHIR data into the LDH? If yes, is there any data scheme available for this import to work?
I don't think it's currently supported, Charming, import. It was just a demo for this tutorial. I think we will progress on it, but currently it's not possible to import.
And there's also an issue with the blurred screen. For example, people can't see the website online. However, I'm also in the stream and I can see it. But what I'm also thinking was maybe people see the camera view and not the stream view. I don't know how that works. So we'll try to figure out what happens and implement it in the next session. So I'm sorry for people online for if they see a blurred screen right now. Yeah, hopefully. So if someone wants to stick around after one, please do.
So I said it's more an improvisation. So we were on the landing page. It's the landing page of the latest resource, and it's a part of the specification for R5. You have a documentation index with many different resources that you can browse through. So you can get information about the terminologies that are used in the FHIR version, about FHIR paths. This is also like a specific FHIR language that you can use to, for example, set up conditional or like rules, etc. You can have information about the API and then having like a guidance on how to profile or what is the workflow, etc., etc. When you click on data types, you get an overview on all data types that are used in FHIR, being primitive types or also complex types. So you have, for example, an instant, a code, a string, an URI, but you can have also like more complex data types, being, for example, a codable concept that is composed of an coding in the text, and the coding itself is also like a very complex data type, being a system, a version, a code, a display, and if it's a user selected or not. So this just like is a general like intro on data types. If you go to resource types, you get the overview on the 157 resources, sorry. So those are categorized in different levels, but you can also have an alphabetical view. You have foundation resources, base resources, clinical resources, so more like for the clinical settings, but also resources related to administrative aspects such as finances, and then very specialized resources for public health or evidence-based medicine, for example, but also like for quality reporting and testing. And in this tutorial, we were mainly focusing on research study, but as we saw already, like in the other IGs, we also use like other resources. So for example, we use the practitioner or the practitioner role. I don't know, I never know where they are. So for example, individuals, but also entities being organizations, just to name some examples.
Just to interrupt you, can you go back? Because we had this question of versions. It's not only that FHIR supports these versions, it has also some kind of additional information that they think how mature, how good they are. And if you see a 0, it means that was just an idea. So this can change heavily, and they can also lose some of these points. So research study is downgraded to 0 in the current version.
It was on 1 before.
It was on 1 before, but patient, for instance, will be at least near 5 or so.
Yeah.
There are 7 levels. And so if you want to, let's say, use FHIR only with resources that has level 4 or 5 or so, you can be quite sure that there's not much to change.
So exactly, you have also like a documentation about those maturity levels being 0 as a draft, and then 6 levels being ascending. Yes?
So, what's different? How is it
It's complex. You have to read it. It depends on how much there's implementation. So if there is no implementation of a resource, it cannot have a higher maturity level. And so there is an iterative process of getting more and more mature.
So I just clicked on research study. So that's now like the resource, the standard resource. You have always like a small introduction, a scope and usage. You get also information on which working group is working on it, the maturity levels, etc. And then you know also if HL7 maybe already defined some extensions or not. And then you get this structure. So this is the main structure that you can see, and you always see a small description for every item. You also see which cardinality is set up by HL7. So 0, 1 is not a mandatory, it's not mandatory, but optional. But if you use it, you can just use it once. 0 asterisk is, you can use it multiple times. And if you see here, status is, for example, a mandatory element with a binding of required. So this means that you have this value set being publication status with those 4 values: draft, active, retired, and unknown, and you're required to use also this values. If you click on one of those elements or variables, you will see again like a small description on every of those items. So you know what is the idea of this item, you know the description or the definition, you have a short display, and then you have also a note or requirements being comments how to use it, or like small help. You get also like some related resources or helpful resources to guide you if you want to choose it or not. So this is just like the general aspects. You also get like for sure like which data type you have to use. In a specific case, you can also change the cardinalities, but for that you have specific rules to comply with, and also some data types can also be modified, but also for that you have some rules. And the first, yeah, so basically like my job when I map things to FHIR is like clicking through the specification. I mean, with time, you know, like approximately like which items to use, but sometimes you really need like to click through all the specification. You have also some elements defined in ancestors, meaning that these elements are used in many different resources or reused. So one a common one is the ID or the meter. But also you can specify which language is your content written in. As said, you can also get references to other resources being referenced in. So for example, a research study can be part of another research study, or you can also reference to a plan definition to describe your protocol and the steps to be followed in your study. You get also different possibilities to view your content. So you can have a UML view of the schema, and here you can really see like which backbone elements are maybe created, which elements are referring to. You can also have an XML view or a JSON view, and you can also have this R4 diff. So this means it's quite the conversion between R4 and R4B, and also R4 and R5, you have also such a table. You get also information about which value sets are already created by HL7 or other organizations, and maybe being promoted or being an example what to use for specific items. So you see the type. Extensible means that you have, for example, already 10 values being defined, but you can add some more if you want. So required is fixed. You have this value set and you have to use it if you want to use this item. Preferred is, as said, like more an advice of HL7. An example is just an example, but you could also use something else. So this just as a general overview on one profile. And here you can also have like different examples of studies that use this profile. So we are still in R5, and if I click on clinicaltrials.gov study record, I will see this general narrative with some elements being described. So for example, the identifier, the name of the study, the title, the labels, and here we already touched on like this discussion. In the example of Seek, we had an acronym, but we can also say it's an official title. We can also refer to related artifacts and have many other metadata being described. I think one element which also really changed between R4 and R5 is this element called status. So before, status was more like publication of the study, yes or no, if it's active, unknown, a draft, etc. And now you can also be more flexible and, for example, indicate the status of recruitment of your study, or if the data collection was already completed or not. You still can also add some associated parties, so namely collaborators being from an industry, academia, and also define their role, if it's a contact or maybe the principal investigator. And also here, for all the examples, you have different views. So you can also just set the XML view or choose the JSON view to have different formats. So I don't know, Matthias.
Yeah, you have to click on TTL, I think. You never click on it. It's a virtual link.
Rarely use it to not say never, but yeah, it's a raw table format, and so you have here the content, and it's quite extensive.
Yeah, it's just another serialization. I mean, it's,
yeah.
But I think it improved in readability from 4 to 5. Small, yeah.
And we're going to devolve into the usual blank nodes are evil conversation. Which has to happen at least every tutorial and every session. So yeah, the cost, there's a lot of blank nodes. In fact, there's basically only one named node usually, and then sometimes none. The cost of that is that it's hard to address something specific in the document. The value of that is that you're not promising a URL, the name of an identifier for something that you're not going to honor in the future. And so the semantics are set that you actually never care about, like you never need an identifier for these things. The reason being that things either have an arity of 1, and so this is a nested thing inside of this, and it's the only one, or they have an arity of n, and in which case they're in a sequence, which means it's the, it's the third one, it's the 0th one, etc. So you can always find your way back to the same item. Yeah, there's no real problem with that. I mean, there's the usual challenge in that because things are sequences, you have to do the RDF rest star / RDF first thing to find things that have certain coding. But I mean, that's just the cost of Sparkle.
Chief apologist for already.
Why is Harold not doing it anymore?
So I don't know if I should also show R4, but I mean, like the general structure is very similar, but maybe can just show that before it was maturity level 1, and that we didn't have, we had only this status being, yeah, more or less a potpourri of anything and everything. And this was quite difficult to use because, yeah, it was not clear if it was for recruitment, for data collection, both mixed, if it's also about publication. So this is, I think, one of the major updates. The other major update is that before you could only indicate the sponsor and the principal investigator, you could only indicate one of each, and in R5 now you are more flexible. You can assign more roles and also indicate more collaborators. And also like this discussion with the labels is, I think, quite improved. We also touched on the inclusion and exclusion criteria before. In R4, you were only able to reference to a group, which is not so flexible than the evidence variable that Alexander presented this morning. So just a quick example. Yeah. I think so. So like. No.
I would say that the clinical one.
Yeah, it would have been also like my yeah, what I would.
Do you mean the resources being mature, or the elements that are part of the? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like in the clinical ones, you see that you have like different levels, but observation is normative. So this is the most stable yeah, level. You have also patient, which is stable, and yeah, and foundation you have also like many resources being normative, but those are more like the technical things. So like the capability statements, the structure definition being like the base of every resource that you create, which operations you can do, code systems and value sets. So when you see like this index, you see that you don't have like any normative, for example, in the specialized domain, but you have like at least one in the clinical one, and some being already on level 3. And yeah, most of them are in foundation. You have a question?
Patients related to the observation or an encounter, these things is not well established. Like I see, okay, within an encounter you have an observation and a description.
So for example, in the observation, you will see that some elements are referring to other resources. So for example, in the observation, you can set your subject. You can say this is this particular patient or this particular group, or it can also refer to a device. The encounter is referred also, and the focus can be to, for example, like any kind of resources. So this is
the question was if it's stable, and it's stable. It's part of the maturity of the resource, so it will not change from the observation side. But if there is another, let's say, a change in location, then of course
it might influence.
Yeah, it might be an influence. This is what you do with profiling. Then you say, I will not accept any value.
Yeah, it is, but you have like specific rules to comply with. So I'm not exactly sure if you could say in this case it's an URI, but I'm pretty sure there's a way to do it. But yeah,
it's always a URI, but you can say it must be, for instance, I will only accept certain resources. Maybe you sit down here.
References. That's good. That's gonna be embarrassing. So references in the FHIR RDF are coded slightly differently because they follow RFC 3986 rules of .. / blah blah blah. So Graham wanted to be more terse than that when he was working on FHIR initially, and so a patient, so an observation will say as a subject of patient /123. And in the turtle, if you look at that, it'll be .. / patient /123, because then you can do regular old URL, relative URL resolution. And you can also have a reference. So basically it won't be subject .. / patient /123. It'll be subject blank node reference .. / patient /123. Instead of a reference there, you can also just have like a label or a name or something like that. So sometimes you won't. So to your question about can I make sure that's always a URL, I don't think you can in a profile. I don't think you could say that.
I think the reference, I mean, you could in the profile say,
it's only
this data type, but another one.
Right, you could say it's only certain kinds of references, but you couldn't say that it's a reference that has a URL versus just any thinner version of a reference.
But the question is if I understand well, then the data is patient-centric stored. An observation always finds a URL then to a patient.
Yeah.
That way, you could make sure that you say, if you do something with patients,
if you do something with patients, that you always store or connect or make everything relative to that individual. And it's the prescription of a patient. It's maybe a healthcare professional which is involved, but it's spinning around the patient then. Is that correct then?
Let's say it's all ARCs are into the patient. You don't say what, the patient doesn't have any ARCs out to their observations or their procedures. Everything is the other way. And so you can think of it as a resource-oriented architecture.
Yeah, it's not bidirectional, or the reference is set bidirectional. And in this profile, or like in the base resource of observation, you see that the subject is 0.1 cardinality. So the cardinality in observation of subject is 0.1, so it's not mandatory. But if you say, okay, in this particular setting, I always want that my observation is referring to a patient because I only have like human subjects and always patients, then you could say, you could change the cardinality and upgrade it to 1.1. You couldn't update it to 1 asterisk, because you have also like some specific rules to comply with the cardinalities.
I'm not sure. So in the profile data types, That's what's my question.
Yeah, you can also profile data types, but I know that some data types can, or you cannot use it then like to be referenced. So we tried to do it with related artifacts in R4, and it was not possible to say, please only use this profile of related artifact. So we were obliged to build some complex extensions, and yeah, it was.
So you had to mimic each subject.
Yeah.
With your own extension that has like.
Yeah. So.
Nice to get a list of these use cases where you got to precedent.
We do a list. So maybe I can shortly show now FHIR shorthand. So FHIR shorthand is, as said, like a programmation language to help you set up or define some HL7 FHIR artifacts, being, for example, profiles, but also you can build your own code systems, value sets, and also create some examples called instances. And also for that, we have an entire specification. You just need to look where quite I also forgot. And if you click on language reference, you get all the rules and all the conventions being used in FHIR shorthand. To guide you like how to create those profiles. Matthias, do you want to say something?
For the tutorial we had I cannot imagine anyone reading the specification and being able to do anything with fish. I never met a person who just said, okay, this is, and then being able to do something in practice. There are maybe 5 people in the world able to do this. So we had a little introduction on our tutorial website. So there is an example where you see all these fish statements line for line that they can do something. And there are also 2 web tools available. Maybe, yep. I do not know this one.
You can also make PR box.
But if you have a look at the website, maybe we can. But if I have to do it here, or yeah, 1 moment, I could also take the.
So usually when we use FSH, we are using some software like Visual Studio Code, and online there's this FSH school, which is I think good for educational purposes. There are some examples. They are also providing guidance how to set up a fish or sushi project locally, also to link it to your GitHub maybe project. Yeah, and some practical examples, and also a converter online.
It's a nice GitHub.
Of course, you can clone it. It's a GitHub. I mean, in theory, this fish is intended for profiling. So you are very good at FHIR and want to do something on your own. And for the tutorial, we misused it only for creating instances. So we do not want to restrict the schema, but because I think a lot of people might not be so much into fish, we had this small dry run here. It's just like a walkthrough. And there is, this is what Sophie was referring to, but it's hard to do anything here in parallel. This is an online tool where you do not have to install anything. And on the left side, you can insert these fish text. On the right side, you can enter JSON text, and then you convert it vice versa. So, for instance, yeah, and then we made this click for click thing. The second what I wanted to show is this validator. You will need it for the tutorial. Here you paste the JSON code, or you can upload a file, and then you click on validate, and he gives you some impression if there are errors or warnings. And the advantage of this one is that you can also somehow not only use the FHIR core, but you could also say, let's say I have to type it here. You could also use, let's say, this implementation guide, and then let's say use these research study, which is already a profile. Because it's an HL7 product, they somehow imported it already. So of course, each additional rule then applies also to the JSON code. So if you only use the JSON, the normal research study, you have only one mandatory field, status. If you use the other guides, there might be additional fields. And just to show you how we also had these, let's say, basic files, and then you go through the tutorial and you see how it's added. For instance, at first you need a status, then you add a title, and it's quite easy because we try to go through all the data types. String is easy, markdown is easy, annotation, and then you see, annotation cannot simply be added as a string because it's a complex data type, so the notion is having this dot. And so it becomes more and more complex, of course. So identifiers, this is something that can have multiple values. So FHIR introduces this indexing thing to allow more than one identifier. And also you see, for instance, if it has such a hash sign, it's part of a code, it's not in string. Then you need to, if you assign codes, you would usually say they are taken from this code system, like this is from clinical trials, one of these IDs referring to a clinical trial. But if you only have the code, it could be anywhere from, I mean, in Germany, we have also a primary registry for clinical trials, and there's in the European Union a registry for clinical trials, and some trials are registered multiple times, so you could provide multiple identifiers. And then you can see, like, if you want to add contacts, it's maybe not possible to go into detail in short time, but there is some semantics, what that all means with these equal signs as being, I stay at the same level. So it's the first contact. And if you want to add a second contact, they have this plus sign. You could also take numbers, but the advantage of these doing it this way is that you can later rearrange them. If you would have hard indices, you would need to change all the indices. And we also have these conditions. And then you see now we switch to international systems like ICD-10 or SNOMED and how they are referenced. It's some kind of constant in a programming language. And of course, then you want to reference other named resources, not only complex data types. And this is why I'm not quite sure what your question about URIs is, because it's always, from the conceptual model, it's always in URL or URI that you are referencing. But of course, these resources has to be created in some other part so that you can have a valid target. Yeah, and the last thing for the tutorial was that you just now said, okay, we have a research study like the one that Xiao Ming presented in her demonstration that you can also create from the Seek system. And now you want to use one of the 3 implementation guides. You're doing it with a simple command. Let's say in the meta profile, you have to say my resource conforms to this implementation guide. And then you, of course, need to you could, for instance, utilize one of the extensions defined in the FHIR4Health implementation guide. As they said, we want to have a license. So Giorgio said he wants to add a license scheme to resources. And in this example, we add the MIT license to our research study, whatever that means, having added a license to such a record. But this would then be a valid FHIR structure. So yeah, and you can also, for instance, if you click on download, then you get the final result. It's not so very large to be handy for a tutorial. So this is the idea for the complete example. And if we have hours and hours and dozens of FHIR experts, the idea principle was that you all bring your trials with you, create representations using one of the IGs, and then we discuss modeling alternatives, because we always argue how it could better be modeled. So we have the FHIR specification that Sophie has already shown, being R5 the current one, R6 the one in development, and R4, yeah, I think the most active in real life. So if you go to the hospital, you will maybe get R4 data. If you are in the Netherlands, you will get R3 data. But this is always a problem if you are the first one, then it's harder for you to stay in line with recent developments. Yeah, then we have the FHIR4FAIR implementation guide. It's just the same, that layout at least, that Sophie presented. And I think the FHIR4Health, I mean, you have made this comparison, no? So maybe, yeah, maybe we switch.
I'll say one tactic.
I'm sorry.
So one tactic that we used in the NHS project, which was a project where we were using solid pods to store patient data, was that we migrated everything on the way in to the most recent version of FHIR, so that people threw us FHIR JSON 3 and FHIR JSON 4, and we turned it all into whatever was like it was 4.5 at the time. And so that worked well enough because we didn't, none of the data happened to be in an element that had changed. And so if some of the data is in an element that has changed, then you're no more screwed than you would be in any other circumstance, because you know, you can't invent the data from some place that doesn't exist. So if somebody didn't, if the version that somebody coded their capture to didn't include some element, and you need that for something in the future, you're not going to be able to invent it anyway. So I would say that the migration path doesn't, that aggressive migration on intake doesn't really have any real downside to it, or at least we didn't encounter one. Oh, except for digital signatures. We had to keep a copy of the original document, so we had a so we could verify a digital signature of it. That was it.
I mean, we had this overview about the maturity, but I think it's not an honest view, because you see a lot of resources, and half of them I never thought them in practice. So if I show this overview to people and they say, okay, only 10 of them are mature and 150 are still in development, so the whole standard is not very stable. But that's not true, because you usually have the patient and the observations and such things, and this is stable, and the architecture is always also stable. But I mean, there are a lot of resources that are not so much used. So it's, yeah, the long tail would be 95% of your resources are stable, of your instances of resources are stable. And we are going both in NFDI and in MII the way of, if we want additional extensions, they should comply to R5, but they are somehow backported to R4.
Right.
There is a mechanism to do this automatically somehow, that they say, okay, you can create it. Implementers hate you because it's so complicated to write these extension structures, but at least it's possible to map it later.
Yeah, right.
That if you look into the clinical systems, and we have about 150 or so in use in a university hospital, and all the times they said, oh, we did not change anything on the API. You say, you know, yeah, you are lying. There will be some change. Nobody knows it. It's not documented. So we added a column for loin codes in the laboratory system, and yeah, this is the level that they usually do. And yeah, but I think we should now move a bit to the documentation, because what we have seen here now is that we can do a lot of things with FHIR, but we want to be able to, let's say, express additional things in FHIR, like data sets or data dictionaries or variables. And yeah.
Okay, so this is just like a very general comparison. I mean, it's really just like 6 variables that we quickly look at. We looked at the FHIR versions being used. So FHIR4FAIR is based on R4B with backport extensions from R5. Why R4B? Because there's a data type that is not existing in R4, being the citation, so that you can really indicate the bibliographic information of a publication or of a document, etc. And FHIR4 and MII based on R4, but also with backport extensions on R5. And if I would set up like the entire project again, to be honest, like I prefer R5, but it's not as major as R4, and it's also not so widely used yet. All 3 IGs have a focus on study metadata, but I would say that the MII and FHIR4 have a stronger focus on that than the FHIR4FAIR implementation guide. Subject metadata in comparison is better addressed by FHIR4FAIR than in FHIR4 and MII. I think the latest 2 are more indicating inclusion-exclusion criteria as strings, or also using group and evidence variables. But in FHIR4FAIR, you could really have a list of the different patients to be enrolled, or the different criteria that you are interested in. So you have really on this subject variable level information. Other metadata is not really addressed by FHIR4FAIR. I mean, beside maybe the fact that you can still indicate or still define some related artifacts, for example, documents or publications that are related to your study or to the subjects. And FHIR4 and the MII have both also focus on documents to be referred. So documents can be protocols or like CRFs, any kinds of documents that you want to address. And FHIR has this data type being an attachment. So you can also really precise your content with a title and URL, where to find it, and other metadata being related. We still don't cover this aspect of data sets in FHIR4, but that's something we are trying to better cover in the next versions, because this is one of the resource types being also defined by data site. And there's still, I think, a big room of how to do it. Should we use a list? Should we use a document for that? Should maybe like a specific resource being created by FHIR? Should it be outside FHIR? This is, I think, there are many questions related to this particular question, and also about data dictionaries, which sometimes are in tabular forms, sometimes being more like free text, and where there are some templates, but they're not strictly used by everyone in the community. Collaborators, there were no specific profiles created in FHIR4FAIR, meaning that this IG is simply using the core resources defined by HL7 and FHIR4 and the MII. We created some profiles for practitioners, organizations, and practitioner rules. And the MII, there were some references to other modules, so not the study module, which Alexander presented today, but to, for example, the beteiligte Person, how it's called in German. And another important aspect, which is also influencing reusability, is the aspect of copyright and licensing. And then FHIR4FAIR and FHIR4 we created some value sets and items or extensions to address this specific variable. And I think in the MII, at least I didn't see anything addressing this particular point, or not in this extent. But I think it's
also on your list, Matthias, right?
Yeah, but we have these modules, huh? So we will not do anything in research study, and with its licensing or provenance or so, it's in another meta module because it will, yeah, somehow influence all resources, not only research studies.
This was just like a very high level comparison of the IGs.
Maybe you can switch to, there is one slide from the FHIR project of all the resources. Now, we just stole this one from Brian because I think this FHIR platform, I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, they are doing a lot of things in, let's say, developing best practices for modeling such research artifacts, and any FHIR resource that is on their list is somehow relevant for research. So, yeah, I'm not sure. My impression is that we do not have so much experts from these resources currently here, but this is what I will have to look into. I mean, most of them are already known, but this is how they think that research data should be modeled. So these are from the 160 currently existing resources. I think these are the ones that you should know somehow. I mean, list and such things are just basic resources for having some kind of container, but others like citation or, let's say, plan definition, I mean, a plan definition is the container object for a clinical trial protocol, but I've never seen any conforming to this plan definition. So maybe we have to find a student with a lot of time. Yes, don't say it too loud, because if you want to slow down progress in our initiatives, you can always say there is another thing. No, I know this bridge effort, and they have done a really large thing. Yeah, we need someone from the bridge team who says, I have a lot of time, I write you 10 plan definitions. But at least, for instance, in bridge, you have a difference between a clinical trial and a study design. So this is a central component in bridge. And there is some kind of mapping, but with any mapping, it's not 100% mapping. So
bridge was an ontology that was developed to capture clinical trials. And one of the sort of interesting bits is that it has 4 different components. It has the 4 different layers. You get for every resource, every sort of class, you've got 4 different uses of it. One is defined. So you say, this is an observation we're going to perform on all the people that are participating in this clinical trial. And so you argue, that's the thing you negotiate with the FDA or the European Drug Administration about. Then you've got the planned, which is when you go and start saying, when in this particular site, we're going to execute this, and there's slight nuances. Then somebody enrolls in the trial, and then you have another one for when you're planning on doing it to then. And then you have finally, you've actually done it. You've drawn the blood, you've taken the measurement, and that gets stored. So it's basically, it captures all of the clinical data, it captures everything that you would do in a clinical trial, including all of the management. Yeah. Right. And so yeah, exactly. So it also has the actual clinical data, and it's the tie between the clinical data that you captured and the box in the CRF that you negotiated with the FDA is very clear. You get to see why this element is captured here, this observation is captured here, is because it was in this box. And
how does it relate to CDISC? Because CDISC is like the official format that you have to use.
Right. So I would say Bridge, Bridge was informed by people who knew CDISC really well. CDISC is sort of just the results, is almost exclusively the results. So it's that last stage. And then there's other related, like Atom, which are earlier stages. But
you could extract maybe or convert from this.
Yeah, you can map. Right. And I think Bridge is really useful for conceptualizing things, but it's not being used to actually capture data. So it's kind of good to get your head around it, and then afterwards say, okay, how are people actually using, how are people expressing this? The therapeutic areas project that I did for FDA, I tried to express everything in Bridge, and it didn't take because it was too complicated to explain to people there. There's one other thing I want to say.
Yeah. The question about this is, can you consider this as a kind of authority tables that you could, authoritative sources that you could maybe start to create and really have a good governance model on that, for example, per country or per region or per initiative? If you speak about here, these different type of resources in this FHIR platform.
I'm not sure like how to answer that. It is already implemented, I think, the trials, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bleeding edge effort. So it's, I mean, they did this large project, this FHIR project, and it's somehow often used because it has some tooling. So you can enter just an ID and then he builds a representation. But of course, it's, I mean, he does it the same way, no matter how you enter a code, he reads a database, makes a mapping, and then he just prints out this file. But if it's the best way to do it, I'm not sure. There is no evaluation, I think. And for instance, if you access clinicaltrials.gov, people may have entered anything, yeah? So,
but at least it's implemented in clinicaltrials.gov, so you can get like an export of the FHIR, of the FHIR serialization by, for example, indicating the NCT identifier. So then you get like the study and the metadata of that. I mean, they are meeting pretty regularly. I think it's in the EBM on FHIR, right? Group.
Yeah, they meet 10 times a week.
So if you want to engage, like, there are like many meetings. And this is also like interrelated also with the CPG on FHIR working group. I mean, it's an entire evidence-based ecosystem somehow, right? So from the study level to the evidence that is generated during the study, and then maybe the clinical workflow where this evidence will maybe be used with the outcomes and the maybe studies that were published on that, on which patients it was set up. And I think the structure is also sometimes used to address clinical guidelines. So which steps are should be followed for which particular patients. So it's an entire ecosystem. And as said, I mean, I think, I'm not sure if it's on the FHIR platform or on clinicaltrials.gov, but I'm pretty sure that you can get an automatic export of your data.
Yeah, they have some kind of collaborations. I think clinicaltrials.gov just, they just use it now regularly.
Are you expecting the data consumer or search engine to evolve in a closed and secured environment? Or are you considering publishing parts of the metadata openly on the web? And if so, do you have any idea of the subset of non-sensitive data rather the sensitive data?
I mean, all these research subject part that is not direct patient data is somehow eligible to be published. I know that there's always a great discussion. We should not share our case report form because other people can just take it and doing their own stuff. And we invested a lot of time in creating it, but that's not really a reason. I mean, I can understand it to a certain point because you don't want to be, let's say, you want your work to be recognized. But on the other hand, in our settings, mostly the taxpayer already paid you for doing it. So there's also the argument that you should just, publish everything. So of course there's a problem with patient-related data. Even there we are arguing that there can be a smaller subset or de-identified or anonymization. NFTI4Health, for instance, has an own anonymization tool. But of course, you cannot really do much with these anonymized data. I tried it, and if you anonymize a lot enough so that the risk is low, then you cannot do anything statistically with it anymore.
You still have no value out of it because people can exercise their choice. You can do a lot of development based on anonymized data. And then
yeah, this was the reason why we tried it, to have example data. In the medical informatics initiative, we do not have example data for 7 years now. And this is always a great problem if we say, okay, this is a module that is to be released, it's published, and then people start using it, and then they come with all their crude real world data.
Okay, so just to quickly show, like on the clinicaltrials.gov website. So I clicked on a random study about COVID, and you have this download button, and now since a couple of months you can choose your file format, being a CSV, JSON, or like a FHIR JSON. So if I download that, it's part of a pilot project, and it's interrelated to the FHIR platform, and I can simply download that from here. I will maybe not open the, I don't know if I find it so quickly.
What are you looking for?
The export.
Yeah, it's I think just a normal
Oh,
web
okay.
download.
Yeah. So it's a, yeah, but I'm not sharing the right screen, but yeah. Just believe me, it's a JSON FHIR format. And the other possibility is to go to FHIR.net, and then you can create, for example, a recommendation, a guideline, resource. Also, you can convert citation from PubMed just by entering the PMID, but you can also convert clinicaltrials.gov identifier. And here I would just need like to find the identifier, and I never know where it is. This is also not.
It's not one of the first items.
Yeah, it's what I would. Oh, here. Sorry. It's stupid for me, but if you submit, then you get the export, and it tells you it's not just one FHIR resource, it's not just a research study, but in total 12 FHIR resources. And there you get the text view with the, yeah, how it is defined also in FHIR, but you can also get the JSON view. So you see this is, for example, a research study.
Oh, was it? How does this work? You have lost?
I don't know.
You're sharing? I'm not sure why.
It was not written that
Maybe it
lost
was a
it.
timeout.
No, no. In the Zoom, I'm sharing. So,
Not sure why this happens, because it switched back to my. Yeah, because this mouse is for this computer. I know that this computer has no mouse, but you should have taken the screen and then.
that's sharing.
I'm
Zoom, it's working. It's only like in this on this screen.
okay.
No, it's working.
I have no idea. I just wanted to follow what she was presenting on my other computer, and maybe I touched something.
So yes, as said, you get a research study. You get also information about the collaborators, which organization was part of. You get another resource, being the practitioner for the medical doctor Baoping Xu, with his contact details.
But you see, for instance, the values are as good as they are entered. Huh? If the telephone syntax is not what you expect, then So this is why I always think that these automatic conversions are limited if the database is not really good.
Hard to go back and find. Should be documented, right?
Yeah, but there is a normative syntax for writing telephone numbers from ITU. So was this design that we should stop immediately? Or was it a sign that we have 5 minutes left? Okay, then I thought it was a no interruption, because I wasn't sure if the next is, it's not starting at 1, I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I have no further points. The only thing is, what do we do next? I mean, we have our projects and we will continue to work on these implementation guides that are used in our initiatives, of course. But for the FHIR4FAIR implementation guide, there is the question, who is using this one? And I think Giorgio is open for any direction. And I think, I mean, there is, for instance, one implementation guide that is centrally managed by HL7 for building shareable value sets. They call it this way. It's like a profile on the terminology, that module that FHIR has. And of course, it's very, relaxed. Any FHIR resource is very relaxed. You have a patient with no attribute, it's a valid patient. And so, people always said, let's make this mandatory and this and this and this and this and this and this, and then we cannot provide this data. So it's a problem. But for the shared value sets, I think they made a good job at saying, okay, if you want to build a terminology, then you should supply this, this, and this. So the basic FHIR structure is very relaxed, but they have some kind of FAIR vocabulary idea. And do you know this implementation guide, Sophie? Because I think this is a way to go. It does not impose too much restrictions, but you could say, okay, if it's a data set, it needs a license. Or if it's a research study, you should have these 6 mandatory attributes. If you cannot provide it, because maybe it's an in-house research project for some PhD student that is not registered anywhere, then it cannot be a FAIR research study. Then it's just a research study. And I think this is a good approach to.
So I think there's, like, I tried an experiment where I took a bunch of synthetic Cynthia, in fact, smoker data, and wrote a FAIR description of it just to sort of see how the experiment would work, and then tried to come up with a use case for it. And the use case we've got is that where people are scheduled for certain surgeries, we want to make sure that that if their vitals are sufficient that they can survive surgery, that we schedule them for surgery, that if they're not, they get scheduled for physical therapy in order to get beefed up so that they're ready to get cut open. And so that the intersection of FAIR and FHIR there was just that the FAIR was, hey, here are the different clinics that are providing this particular interface, this FHIR SQL interface where you can do SQL queries over FHIR, and have these kind of patients. And so then the machine would say, okay, I'm going to go and integrate across those and find who to schedule for physical therapy and who to put under the knife immediately. But that was kind of a weak use case, honestly, in my opinion. It was like we basically replaced a list of interfaces of here are the FHIR SQL interfaces that we've got with a FAIR description, FTP, the index that said, here are the things, here are the FHIR SQL interfaces we've got. And that isn't such a great big boon. So I'm really interested in other use cases where that intersection of having FAIR descriptions of the data really helps with a runtime clinical intervention. And that, I think that happens, that's more likely to happen when you've got really volatile data. You've got people who are describing their interfaces and that's changing fairly rapidly. B, it's a very wide area. Like we were just doing it for a particular kind of surgery. And so you're going to know everybody in the town who's related to that. Whereas if you're doing it for a wide area of things, you might be able to find something where it's got a bigger boon. Another one might be if you start getting into medications and interactions and stuff like that, finding it like pharmacies pop in and out of existence and register and say and you get to intervene a little bit more effectively when somebody's got two different medications that contravene that are contraindicated or something like that. But I'm really, I think that the motivations for integrating detailed clinical data with fair descriptions of that data, with like nice metadata that describes that data, are a little thin on the ground, and I would love to develop them.
Maybe have a suggestion about how to work with real world evidence, making, for example, the data that you generate as an individual in your own situation, like medication that you take, things that you maybe smart wearables that you would like to link. Maybe also the use case you were telling about pregnancy information, or during pregnancy that you capture some information yourself as an individual. But then the moment by rightly structuring it, that you're able to discuss it, exchange it with a healthcare professional in the right way, and that you can do it universally.
But that's standardization. That's not quite the same as having.
But the findability could be that if you have your data in a certain way organized and you're able to capture that, is it still findable for that physician in an, let's say, a real situation where you have to be able to implement it? I know it's standardization. Yeah, something like that. You have to go there and say, okay, can you read out my stuff?
Yeah, or routing something.
Something like that. Yeah. Or it could be vaccination information, let's say, not so very intrusive, but maybe also allergies or stuff like that. To say, okay, in a certain situation, can you share it with another kind of healthcare professional?
I don't want to annoy anyone, but I have to be the person. We can go on for a bit longer, I think, but lunch is being served right now, and there's also one last question online. I think it's fair for this person to ask that question because they aren't here. So the question is, what is the approach of NFDI4Health and MII towards the FHIR4FAIR IG? Are they conformant?
So it's a very tough question, to be honest. I mean, when I started NFDI4Health, I didn't have any idea of the FHIR4FAIR IG. And as we quickly showed before, I mean, FHIR4FAIR IG is quite basic now, or until now, I find. I mean, they're focusing on the same thing that NFDI4Health, study level and subject level. They have also similar goals and also similar stakeholders. I think NFDI4Health and MII are already stricter than FHIR4FAIR. And I think this is something you already touched upon. I mean, where's the right balance between being too strict or not strict enough, and also which levels need to be addressed, like in fair data sharing. I think we all agree that the study level metadata is important, the subject level metadata, but also maybe the instrument or data dictionaries and data sets. So the variable level are really important. And that's something where like addressing also in NFDI4Health and the MII. So I wouldn't say we are compliant, but I think we're working towards it. But maybe once.
Yeah, I think they do not collide. So
That's very diplomatic.
I think they try to do different things. I mean, what we tried was to add information on a research data level, like what is the publication based on this data, and what is the license, and what is the context where this data come from. But we do not try to build a clinical trial registry currently. But I think, yeah, we can somehow merge these efforts. What I do not like to take is, we always get this, Matthias, we need an additional element. It's a Boolean and it's like, was it added last year? Yeah? In our institution. So we need a last year Boolean. And so no, never ever will this come into the standard. So, you know, I will not say that we will take any attribute, but we of course also need to show that we are implemented, or HL7 will kick this effort. So that is why we need to somehow have a marriage between these implementation guides. And maybe the FAIR for Health implementation guide can switch to R5 because it's the current version. And then we will have to look what we need additionally in the other implementation guides. But for instance, we do not need a lot of restrictions for research study because yeah, all the time that I said it's only valid this way, I lose some people not able or not willing to do it this way. So.
But yeah, if I may add, like if we would start again the project NFTI for Health, I think we would really use like FHIR as a base and not like create a metadata model and then map it to FHIR. I really think this is not the perfect way to go. I really would have set it up directly from FHIR and then see like how much can be covered, how much is needed, and is it really needed, or is it just because some professor, some group has a particular preference for such items in this study context. But I think we would have needed some examples, real use cases in the beginning to really have an assessment of what is really common and what is not so common, and to not have such an extensive model from the beginning on. So I think the way to go is more try to take like the international standards, if they are fitting, perfect. If not, then engage in the working groups and try to make them change, evolve, or adapt. But really collect the real use cases first before just setting up like a very extensive metadata schema that tries to be perfect from a beginning on.
It's a bit like in CDISC where they have the protocol representation group and the study design model. And the first one is from the conceptual point of view where all the experts are in, and the second one is from the IT model. And you said you have two standards for the same thing and they are hardly comparable with any regard. So yeah, that happens if on the one hand, everybody can just have a good idea and we model it in some document, let's say in Excel or Word. And on the other hand, there are techies who just want to have a good representation. So